Hey everyone, I'm Jean Chatzky. Thanks so much for joining me today on HerMoney, where we talk about how personal finance and money touches pretty much everything in our lives. When we think about our financial fears, there is one that tops the list: running out of money before we run out of time. Here are just a few of the many data points. 61% of Americans are more afraid of running out of money in retirement than they are of dying. According to Allianz, 66% of Americans fear they will run out of money during retirement, according to Go Banking Rates. 40% of households where the head of household is between the age of 35 and 64 are expected to run short of money in retirement, according to the Employee Benefits Research Institute. I think you pretty much get the idea. Americans have a problem. And as the aforementioned cut of many studies, all saying pretty much the same thing, shows, we know it. We know that unless we do something big, something different, many of us are going to blow through the money that we've stashed away for retirement long before we die. We may not, quote unquote, run out, as so much research seems to predict, but we'll find ourselves left essentially with just Social Security, which about 3/4 of people believe is going to fall short itself, plus whatever we might be able to pick up from a part-time gig that we never really wanted in the first place. In other words, we'll be living on a lot less than we are right now. But here's the thing, that doesn't have to happen. What if we had a way to guarantee ourselves a pension of sorts that would last the rest of our lives? And what if having that paycheck meant that you could spend more, double even, the amount of money that you'd likely spend if you simply pulled money out of your retirement accounts bit by bit? It is possible to do this. It's not even that hard. It doesn't require systemic change or government intervention or access to hedge funds or private equity or crypto. We have the ability to fix this problem in our own lives with tools that we already have access to today. These tools are called annuities. And to say annuities is a pretty loaded topic is, I think, an understatement. But the fact is, more people are interested in and buying annuities than in the past. In 2023, U.S. annuity sales hit a record for the second year in a row. $385 billion in total sales, as rising interest rates made the products more attractive and people looking at retirement decided to try to lock some income in. I don't think it's a secret that I like the idea of annuities as one of my tools in retirement. I like the idea of knowing that at least my fixed costs will be covered so that I can invest the rest of my money mostly in stocks for growth and for inflation protection. But as I said, the topic is complicated. The marketplace is complex. And that has led to more than a few myths and misunderstandings around these products, which is why I'm excited today to have an important conversation with two amazing experts. Minji Ro is Chief Strategy Officer at Gainbridge, which I should note is one of the sponsors of the HerMoney podcast, and Jason Fichtner is Chief Economist at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So before we jump into the elephant in the room, Minji, can you just tell us in the simplest possible terms, what is an annuity?
I would love to. So at its most basic level, an annuity is a financial contract between you and an insurance company. Like you mentioned, it's primarily retirement focused and it gives you a steady stream of income during retirement. And it is the only product that pays a guaranteed stream of income for life, even if you eat into the entirety of your investment and what's grown over time. And this is because insurance companies have expertise in managing longevity risk, which is very different from banks or mutual fund companies. So in an annuity, you would give the insurance company a lump sum of money or a string of payments over time. And in return, the insurance company promises to pay you a certain amount of money on a regular basis, right? Either a lump sum or a string of income payments based on the payout profile that you decide at the beginning. There are a wide variety of annuities, like you mentioned, ranging from really conservative, low-risk profile products, similar to a CD, all the way to full-on market risk, right? Similar to a mutual fund. And I think that's what makes annuities confusing or makes them somewhat intimidating, right? And you touched upon this. There are people out there who are extremely vocal about how terrible annuities are. And let's be really honest, right? Some of the criticisms are absolutely warranted. High commissions, very complex payouts, lack of transparency, depending on who you're talking to. And so the criticism is really deserved in certain cases, but definitely not the entirety of the product class. And so a helpful analogy could be thinking about annuities like cars in terms of the features and the pricing, but most importantly, in terms of needing to find the right one for you, right? Some people won't need a car in the same way some people won't need an annuity, but the right answer is really dependent on your unique circumstances. Do you care about safety or do you care about the 0 to 60 speed, right? And so if anything, I think starting off with the word annuity isn't the most productive place to start because it's so charged. And so we like to go back to the basics, right? If we describe the set of features and the benefits to people, right, it is something they want. Do you want some level of protection? Do you want to make sure that you don't outlive your income and you want some sort of certainty? People want that. And that's the ability to receive a guaranteed paycheck for life. And so like with anything, right, you have to do your homework and you have to have a view on your own priorities and the outcomes that you're solving for.
People want it. And as we dig into these products a little bit more, and we will sort of explain the nuances, I think we're going to have to discuss the trade-off too, which is that sometimes you give the insurance company a big chunk of money because it's insurance. And if you die relatively shortly thereafter, you don't always get that money back. So that's part of the trade-off that I think that people have to understand. But you're right. A lot of people who say that they are too complicated and too expensive, and yet economists are typically not those people, which has always been sort of interesting to me. Jason, why do economists, as an economist, why do economists like annuities?
Well, I think it's important to point out when we start walking through, because Minji mentioned this and you mentioned it too, that annuities are contracts. And to many people, that seems complex. They can go on a platform and buy a mutual fund. They can buy a stock. They can buy an exchange-traded fund. It's a little bit difficult to do that in the same context with an annuity. And I think from an economist standpoint, what economists like is this stream of income that's guaranteed. And what's been changing over time, and we sort of talked about this idea, Minji mentioned sort of the complexity, the cost, the confusion, the transparency. Those are the things that have been changing over time. Like there are still people who think there's only one type of annuity out there. There are more types of annuities and packages and preferences that can fit individuals than we have time to discuss today. And even one about the idea of you mentioning, Jim, handing over money that if you die, you might not get it back. Well, there are survivor benefits that you can wrap into an annuity. So there are a lot of things we can customize to fit individuals' preferences and their risks. And this is why economists like insurance, especially annuities, because you are offloading some of the risk of the individual onto an insurance company. So you think about somebody you mentioned has a pot of money and they're trying to figure out how to make that pot of money last them for their lifetime. They don't know how long they're going to live. And so they're very concerned that they can't spend enough. And so they don't spend enough, they spend too little, and they draw down that savings. And so this is what that license to spend paper you were talking about earlier that David Blanche and Michael Finke have done show, is that somebody who might have, say, $500,000 of wealth or assets will draw down that less and spend less than if they converted that to an annuity and had, say, $35,000 guaranteed to spend each year, when economists call that a budget constraint. So imagine you are working throughout your life, and when you work, you get a paycheck. And that paycheck is your budget constraint. You know, out of that paycheck, you got to pay for your housing, your food, your travel expenses, your car, and some savings. What about replicating that paycheck when you work, that a paycheck in retirement? And that's what an annuity can help you do, is that gives you that security, that comfort, knowing that's your budget constraint. And what we find is not only are the license to spend and people spend more than they were if they were just drawing down their assets on their own, but they avoid certain risks like market risk. Imagine you had $500,000 and you were drawing down 4% a year. You had a 2008 collapse. All of a sudden, your 401k is a 201k. You can only spend half as much instead of having that annuity guarantee that protection. We also find that there's something called state of course, another behavioral aspect economists like. For people who have that level of protection, that guaranteed income, they can let their other assets sit. And you mentioned this, Gene. And we see behaviorally when people rely on market income and the market goes down, they get very nervous, they can't sleep at night, and they may sell their assets at just the wrong time at the market bottom. For those who have more protected income, realize they have the income they need to spend what they need, and they can let those assets sit and recover. And those are very important features when we think about what annuities can give you. It's basically longevity protection, but it's also income protection and offloading some of that risk. And that's why economists really like the idea of thinking about annuities and retirement, because of that protection it can provide against various forms of risk.
You brought up the topic of the license to spend paper, which is a piece of research that David Blanchett and Michael Finca did. And I think this part of it is really fascinating because I've seen it in life. My mother had an amount of money in her retirement accounts 20 years ago when my father died. My mother just passed away and she has slightly more money. And that made her so happy because she wasn't spending her principal. And it always bothered me because she should have spent her principal. Like, she should have taken more trips. She should have, she wasn't really worried about leaving money for my brothers or for me. She just didn't like the idea that she was going to spend her principal. And that means that we have a lot of retirees like my mother who aren't enjoying their lives as much as they potentially could if they converted some of it, not all of it, to income.
This is also an important sort of why there's a shift going on right now in annuities. And we should mention, G, that my other hat, besides being the Bipartisan Policy Center, as the executive director of the Retirement Income Institute, the Alliance for Lifetime Income, which is helping change the narrative and framing that's been, I think, negative in the last several years and now very much more positive. As people realize, as we hit on what we call our peak 65 moment, where 4.1 million Americans are turning 65 every year between now and 2027. That's 11,200 a day. And a lot of them are doing so without the defined pension benefit plan that our parents or grandparents had. And that was sort of that protected income they got retirement. Now you've changed from the defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan. And that further exacerbates sort of the fear people have of running out of money. And what we need to do is help them understand how to take that defined contribution asset base and turn that to some form of protected income. To your point, Gene, it doesn't have to be all, because Social Security is the bedrock for Americans, and hence Social Security is an annuity. It is the most protected inflation annuity out there, and so combinations of seeing how we can create income on top of Social Security is protected, maybe help people facilitate delayed claiming Social Security so they can get a higher monthly benefit that's inflation protected for the rest of their life, are all now changing the conversations about the importance of annuities in retirement as we start thinking about changing the very framing of retirement and saying now income is the outcome in retirement.
So let's dig into these products a little bit more. And I should also mention, Jason, that's how I know you. We've done work together for the Alliance for Lifetime Income, and that's how I've learned all of these tools and strategies. Minji, when we talk about the different products that fall under the heading of annuities with a capital A, what are the three basic types and how are they different? How do they work?
So 3 major buckets of annuities, and I'll start with the lowest risk and work my way up. The first is a fixed annuity. They're the insurance company equivalent of a bank CD, and you can go to a bank and they will have a menu of time periods and interest rates for each of those time periods, and you get locked into the time period and the interest rate. Fixed annuities work the same way, meaning your original principal is never at risk, and you know that the fixed interest rate that the insurance company is offering when you are making that decision. And at the end of that period, you can get your principal and your growth back. Now, a couple of key differences between a fixed annuity and a CD. First, obviously, your counterparty is an insurance company versus a bank. And this means that the regulatory bodies that govern the institution and the entities that cover you if there is a bankruptcy are different. Second, your growth in an annuity is tax deferred, which is one of the biggest advantages within annuities. In a bank CD, you get the interest paid every year, but you do pay taxes on it as you receive that interest income. And third, you have some access to a portion of your money. Usually it's up to 10% of what you invested if you need it, but just like a CD, you should really think about this money as something that you don't need to touch over the life of that contract. And so fixed annuities, principal protected, you know exactly what your rate is going to be and how your money is going to grow over time. The next bucket is fixed index annuities, or FIAs. And as a little cheat code, right, anything that has the word fixed in it means that your principal is not at risk. So in a FIA, you don't know the rate at which your money is going to grow because your returns are going to be tied to a market index. Typically, it's the S&P 500, but there's a huge variety of indices out there. And you have the option of picking the indices and the payouts. And you'll hear terms like participation rate or cap or spread. And because you're taking a risk on a market index, you have the potential for much higher returns. So the other side of that is if markets don't perform, you can have a time period where your return is zero, which makes sense because the opportunity to have higher returns means you have to give something up. And in this case, it's that fixed interest rate. And so fixed index annuities are principal protected, but you don't know what your return is going to be since it's linked to a market index. Could be higher, could be lower, depending on how that index performs. And then the third and last bucket, variable annuities. This is basically investing in mutual funds with an insurance wrapper. And so the value of your annuity goes up or down based on the underlying funds that you've chosen. And so your principal is fully at risk, which is different.
Okay, that is a very clear explanation, Minji. It might have been the clearest explanation that I've ever heard. So thank you for that. I wanted to ask a follow-up about the tax treatment, because if anybody has ever talked to you about buying an annuity, they put the taxes up front. Tax deferred, tax deferred, tax deferred. Does it work like a 401k where you put your money in, you get the tax deferral, and you pay the taxes when the money comes out?
At a high level, that is absolutely how it works. I mean, if it's helpful, I can go through an example comparing a CD versus annuity just to make sure that we're on the same page about how the deferral works. All three annuities, right, whether it's fixed index or variable, all benefit from tax deferred growth, which is, like you point out, a huge advantage compared to most other investments. And there are two specific parts as to why tax deferral is so attractive, right? So if you have $100, right, and let's say you're investing $100 in a CD versus $100 in a fixed annuity, and let's say that they're both offering 5% interest over a 5-year time period to make the math easy. In a CD, you receive $5, right, which is 5% of $100 every year. You pay taxes on that $5 because you get it 1099 every year. And at the end of 5 years, you get $100 back, and you've been paid $25 of interest over time, and you've paid taxes on $25. In an annuity, you're credited 5% on your account value. So after year one, your account value is 105. And in year two, you get 5% on 105. And that compounds over time because you are not paying taxes on that accretion. And you only, to your point, pay taxes when you start taking payments out of the annuity, which you may or may not decide to do at the end of 5 years. And so it's important to note that you don't have access to the interest paid like you do in a CD, in an annuity. But if we're talking about protecting retirement money that you're not going to touch, that's probably a good built-in safety mechanism. And once you elect to take income from an annuity, usually when you've reached retirement, you're most likely going to be in a lower tax bracket, right, versus your peak earning years. And your taxes, once you start taking income, depend on how you made your initial investment, right? Really important, as always, to work with a tax professional who understands your specific circumstances. But generally, if it's qualified annuity, the money you invested was pre-tax. 100% of your withdrawals will be taxable at your then applicable tax rate. However, if your annuity is non-qualified, which means you invested using after-tax dollars, you pay taxes on the portion of withdrawals or what's grown over time, and you receive the principal tax-free since that principal was already taxed. But again, obviously very important to talk to your tax professional.
There's this thing called the annuity puzzle. It's a phenomenon that a lot of psychologists and economists, behavioral economists, have talked about over time. People like Richard Thaler and Shlomo Ben-Artzi. And it basically refers to the fact that although these things sound like they make a lot of sense, they sound like they belong in the field of rational science, people don't do this, right? When you compare the size of the people who are annuitizing, leave Social Security to the side for a second, to the size of the people who are trying to follow the 4% rule for pulling money out of their 401k or just doing it haphazardly, it's pretty small. Jason, why does this puzzle exist? And did I define it correctly?
You got it right, Gene. This is where the economists are called dismal scientists for a reason. And the one reason why I love actuaries is they make economists look like we have a sense of humor and personality. But this gets into one of the key issues when we're talking about retirement and the behavioral barriers that people have to annuitization and protected income, whether it's short-term or lifetime strategies, is that think about the mindset in which we talked about annuities and the protection they give and how it can offload risk from the individual onto an insurance company. Think about the mindset we're telling people today when they start working at age 22, 24 out of school, and they get into a 401k plan, and we tell them to save. And we tell them you have to worry about how much you are earning, how much you're saving, what the return on that saving is. In other words, go look for yield, S&P 500 equities. It's all about the return. It's about the asset building. Then people get to retirement and we say, good luck, you're on your own. And people have that mindset of appreciation and accumulation. We haven't turned it into decumulation or the spending problem yet. And so we haven't trained people to think about spending or think about income. So they work their entire life, 40 plus years, to amass this wealth. And then they don't know what to do with it. And they're like, wait, you want me to give this to an insurance company in exchange for a stream of income? No, I'll just do it myself. And again, they discount improperly. They don't understand the market risk, the sequence, the return risk, the longevity risk, all the other risks that are out there. And that behavioral thing is hard to do because, again, you've saved for so long and now you're being asked to surrender some of that savings or all of it for a stream of income. So what we're doing now is changing the narrative framing of this and trying to figure out and help people understand, one, the value of it. And again, literally the financial value, both thinking about a stream of income. You can do a 4% rule, or how would you change that to getting a stream of income that's protected that would allow you to get maybe more? So one is the financial, and two is the behavioral. When people have that protected income, they sleep better because again, they're not worried about the market timing and the risk. And so talking about how actually that risk means a lot for the mental and psychological health. And that's one of the barriers with the annuity part, because economists understand the financial benefits of it. But individual people, of course, think about the behavioral and what are those barriers to turning over money that they've saved so long to accumulate.
I mean, it makes sense to me in the same way that I think about insuring my home, which I do, or insuring my car, which I do. I mean, I have a disability income policy, which I hate, by the way. I hate writing the check for this policy because A, it's expensive, and B, it's like the one thing that I think about, I'm never going to use this, I'm not going to get this money back, blah, blah, blah. And yet every quarter I write the check because the alternative is worse. And that's where I think we haven't made the leap with this, that the alternative is worse.
Well, it's also, and both you and Minji had sort of hit on this, it's the framing of this, right? So basically it's moving away from a investment frame to more of a consumption and an income frame. That's one of it. And if you were to go out to people, like I've always like telling this joke, if you go out to people and say, do you want to make sure that you don't outlive your savings? So you basically make sure you have enough savings to last the rest of your life. They say yes. Do you tell them you want to be protected from market risk? They say yes. Do you ask, do you want a personal pension? They say yes. So do you want a paycheck for life? They say yes. Do you want an annuity? They say no. We've just described all the things that annuities do. So I think part of this is, again, changing the framing. And you can see this in the behavioral science research. If you go out and ask people, would you like to create a personal pension for you where you get a paycheck for life? They all say yes. They're like, I love the idea. And that's how in some ways we can get over this behavioral annuity puzzle barrier.
This, as I mentioned at the top of the show, is particularly important for women. It's important for us because we earn less. It's important because we outlive our partners. The Alliance for Lifetime Income did a study that found that about 52% of women are specifically worried about running out of money in retirement. Minji, can you talk about this idea for women in particular?
Yeah, I would love to. Obviously, something that's really important to me. So three thoughts on that. One is, you and I have talked about all this research around women and risk tolerance, right? We know our risk tolerance is typically lower compared to men, and we have this attachment to security and safety. And so this is an argument that I am having with my financial advisor all the time, right? I, as a finance professional, sit in too much cash, which was very problematic a few years ago when cash was earning nothing, and I wasn't growing my assets the way that I could have been. And so annuities, particularly now, are a good intermediate step kind of in the right direction. If I look at one of our products, it's a 7-year product on the Gainbridge platform, and it's right around a 6% crediting rate, which beats most CDs at this point in time. And it's not perfect, right? Emily, my financial advisor, isn't happy with me since it isn't pure equities, but she's not as mad at me, which feels like a little bit of a win. So it's a good intermediate step, right? Second, women, I think, typically carry a lot of the mental load. So the more things that we can put in place that don't require active decision making or touching and adjusting all the time, the better. And so in the case of annuities, I know exactly how my money is growing. I know exactly how much lifetime income I'm going to get depending on when I start taking income. And in my case, I can earmark that income for woodworking, which is my hobby, or for anything, like you said, that people want to enjoy in their retirement, right? And I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about running out of money for that particular hobby as long as I'm alive. And then the third most important thing that both you and Jason have touched upon is managing our own longevity risk. We know women live longer, and we also know that women are very concerned about outliving their money, which is a legitimate concern given the way that life expectancies are changing over time, right? And again, annuities and lifetime income futures are the only product that addresses this risk. And so, someone born in 1970 had a life expectancy of around 70. Now life expectancy for women in the US is closer to 80. But it's not even as simple as saying, oh, I'm going to live until 80 and cross my fingers after that, right? If you look at some of the information from the Society of Actuaries, if you are a 65-year-old woman today, you actually have a 65% probability of reaching the age of 85. And 46% or close to 50 that you're going to reach 90 if you are 65 today. And so given everything that you both have said, to me, it would make sense that a portion of your retirement assets are in something that will pay you for as long as you are alive, even if you eat into everything that you've invested in.
I think I want to add one thing to that, Gene, that's just important, because we're talking about lifetime income. And I think we talk about the annuity puzzle and the behavioral barriers to annuitization on some ways. And Minji mentioned this, there's terms. So you don't have to get a lifetime annuity. You could do something a little bit more simple, which is like, let's do a bridge annuity, which you set up and say someone wants to get Social Security benefits at 62, but their forward term age is 67, and you can get a larger benefit even by way to age 70. You could do a bridge annuity that gives you a fixed term annuity, which replicates your age 62 Social Security benefit for a short period of time, and then claim Social Security, which would give you a higher monthly benefit that's inflation protected for the rest of your life. So this is where a financial planner can come in. And again, there's so many different products out there. You can customize it for the individual. It's important to have that conversation.
Which is why I'm not sure that the next question I'm going to ask you both has an answer. I'm wondering, is there an age at which you should start looking at these products? And is there a portion of your assets that makes general sense to think about putting into them? Minji, you're nodding,
So
so you go first.
Sure. It really depends on your own personal circumstances. There is no age at which you're too young to start thinking about annuities, right? And start getting your arms around the concept. If I look at our own client base, our youngest client is 29 and our oldest client is 92. The average and the median is somewhere around 64 and 65. So still very much in the retirement kind of age that people think about. From a sizing perspective, the approach that I've seen a lot of people take is to carve out a part of your fixed income or your bond allocation, right? Especially if you're dealing with fixed or fixed indexed annuities. And if you look at some of the work that we're in the middle of doing, if you add annuities to a portfolio mix, right, your returns go up and your volatility goes down. And so on a risk adjusted basis, your returns go up. That is a lot of words just to say that your allocation to annuities will change over time and they will grow as you approach retirement. So there isn't a singular answer for people just to pop in.
I think what I'd add to that, everything Minji said, I would agree with, and I would add sort of like what percentage of your portfolio might you want to have as protected income or annuities. And I think the way to think about this behaviorally is if we kind of go back to the discussion of a three-legged stool for retirement security, you had usually your defined benefit pension plan, which is now your DC plan, you had Social Security, and you had personal savings. Social Security is designed on average to replace about 40% of your pre-retirement income in retirement. A lot of financial planners suggest that you have 70 or 80% income in retirement based on your pre-retirement income. So if Social Security is giving you 40, you've got to make up another 30. And part of that can be a drawdown strategy, it can be an annuity, but I think when you start thinking about it, people should look at and talk to a financial advisor, what percentage of my pre-retirement income or what do I need as income in retirement? How much is Social Security filling? And then replace the difference with that gap, and that can be an annuity. And as Minji said, we kind of think about this as you have an equity portion, fixed income portion, and the annuity will probably come out of the fixed income portion. And those together provide you the extra sources of income you need to retire.
I think it's interesting that, Minji, you mentioned Emily, your financial advisor. I also work with somebody, and we're talking about a lot of complicated topics and probably have thrown out some words today that you may not have heard before. And so the suggestion here is this is a starting point for a conversation that you may, along the way, want to have with a professional. Nobody is suggesting that you put this all together yourself, but these are tools that you need to know about. They are also coming very quickly to your 401k and your other retirement plans. So you're going to start hearing and seeing and learning more about them. And it's an important thing to be aware of as you start to think about and plan your way toward an eventual retirement. So Minji Ro, Jason Fichtner, thank you so much for a great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Jane.